Hey everyone, I just want to say a huge thank you to all of you for helping me reach 100 subscribers. I honestly couldn't have done this without your love, support, and constant encouragement. Every like, comment, and subscribe means a lot to me. Now let's keep this journey going. Our next target is 200 subscribers, and I know we can do it together. If you enjoy my content, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let's grow as a family. Thank you once again. When Luffy vanishes inside ancient ruins, the Straw Hats are pulled into a terrifying journey through his past. Trapped within Luffy's memories, the crew witnesses moments of brotherhood with Ace and Sabo, childhood pain, and scars Luffy never shared. As past and present blur, the Straw Hats must confront truths that were never meant for them to see, learning what truly shaped their captain. To escape, they must not only find Luffy, but also come to terms with the weight of the memories he carried alone. Disclaimer: this story do not belong to me. The author is Warm Memories and Brotherly Bonds by RoseDragonWitch. Respect to author.
Chapter 54, Goodbye Ace, my brother. Chapter 53, Goodbye Ace, my brother. It was a blaze of victory as the Straw Hats stared in amazement and bafflement at what had just happened. It just sent everything they thought they knew at what happened at Marineford crashing down around them. It made no sense to any of them at all. But at that brief moment, not a one of them cared as it finally fully sunk in what just happened. Luffy, he saved him. Chopper gasped before his eyes turned bright and he yelled, he did it. He saved Ace after all. I can't believe it. Usopp shouted as tears of happiness fell from his eyes and he was hugging Brook just as Frankie grabbed them both from behind and swept them up into his arms in a massive bear hug. After all the hell he went through, he did it in the end. He fought against the whole government, spitting right in their faces and swiped their prisoner out from under their noses. Oh, Luffy-san. Brook sobbed out joyfully, I'm so happy for you. He then added to Frankie, Frankie-san, you're crushing my lungs. Ah, not that I have lungs anymore, yo-ha-ho-ho. Nami was also laughing happily, her own heart soaring at the sight of it all. Seeing this, after everything, made it all feel like it had just been a bad dream. Sanji clapped loudly and chortled as Frankie twirled around them with Brook and Usopp still in his arms, looking close to dancing. Robin was smiling as well, enjoying the hug that Chopper was giving her as he leapt around her legs. But what hurt the most was that she just couldn't bring herself to break the happy mood by reminding them all what was bound to happen. Zoro was the only one who wasn't smiling, and yet there was an air of pride hanging around him as he watched the scene. Like Robin, he just couldn't speak up and try to tell them that something was seriously wrong here. He felt his own insides roar with approval when he saw the three of them in Ace's protective flames. But it didn't make any sense to him. Luffy did what he set out to do and saved his brother at long last. They got him back and all they had to do was run from this place, so how could it have possibly gone so horribly wrong? He thought hard to remember all that he knew about the end of the war. From what he heard from Mihawk and the papers was that Whitebeard and Ace both died on that battlefield, and according to Mihawk, with Luffy seeing his brother's death before he managed to escape. Just what happened? The Whitebeard pirates and their allies were all cheering in joy at the sight of seeing Ace free from those chains while the Marines stared up in horror and stunned disbelief. And at last, Zoro couldn't help but let out a snort of laughter when he saw their stupefied expressions. They couldn't have looked more stunned at what they were seeing. Luffy just had that effect on people. Fire Fist Ace is free. The Marines all cried out in shock. Hell yeah. Frankie roared out cheerfully, finally dropping his two crewmates and struck a pose as Brook, Usopp, and Chopper all cheered together, jumping up and down as if they were at some kind of party. Yeah. The Whitebeard pirates all screamed out, some of them dancing for joy. Straw Hat Luffy really did it. He set Ace free. Ace stretched out a hand to grab Luffy by his shirt and held onto him as they flew through the fire, with Luffy sure to hold onto Mr. 3, who seemed to have been in such a state of surprise that he had become somewhat cationic, if not fainting right away. Though some of the shock had worn off for the Marines and they looked determined not to let them escape after all this and started to ready their cannons and guns, ready to start firing again. Should have killed him when they had the chance. Sanji smirked before the smile was wiped clean off at his words, suddenly regretting them at once, and the happiness was starting to leave the rest of the crew as they looked at each other. They had got so caught up in the moment that most of them hadn't really thought. Ace-san is safe. Brook started off slowly. They're still on battlefield, Zoro explained. There is no such thing as safe, so long as they're here. But how could Ace have died? Usopp shouted out suddenly. Luffy did it. He saved him, didn't he? So what's going on here? They should be able to leave now. He had always thought that Ace had died because they hadn't been able to get to him in time, but this memory had to be true. Luffy did end up freeing his brother, against all the odds, and now they were both free. So what's the damn problem with it? Something tells me that we aren't going to like the answer, Robin said, her seriousness coming back to her face. But whatever happens, we need to remember that it's over. We can't do anything to help or change it. If we were there then I bet we could've, Frankie hissed under his breath. Well, that's the whole problem here, isn't it? Zoro growled to himself as he looked up to see the two falling to the ground fast. We weren't. Stay sharp, Luffy, Ace called seriously. Stay on your toes. Right, Luffy said in agreement. Are you too crazy? Mr. 3 shouted out in fright at the idea of fighting more Marines. Yes, Sanji said as if it was obvious. Yes, they are. You can tell from that alone that they're brothers. Oh, right, I almost forgot about him, Frankie said, looking up to Mr. 3. Hey, 3, I take back everything I ever said about you. Right, I guess he's not all bad, after all, Nami said, still having mixed feelings about that. She still didn't forgive him for when he tried to turn them into wax statues back at Little Garden, as well for leaving Luffy behind back at Impel Down, but he did end up helping the fight against Magellan and to free Ace at the end, didn't he? God, everything about this war is just upside down. Despite everything, he really did have some good in there, Robin said, her mouth smiling a little. That's good to know, whatever else he might be, he does have an honorable side to him. Ace's body suddenly burst into flames as he created a kind of column of fire blazing down at the Marines that were running beneath them. They shrieked and ran for their lives as they landed, with Ace creating a kind of barrier of fire around Luffy and Mr. 3 to protect them from getting burned as the wildfire raged around them. By the time that it finally died down enough for them to see, the two were standing among the flames, their fists held up and ready to start throwing more punches, as Mr. 3 laid on the ground in fear before he attempted to crawl away in fear. Ace-san, Luffy-kun, they heard Jinbei's ecstatic voice over all the noise as Whitebeard was laughing loudly. Show them no mercy, Nami shouted, thinking that Ace deserved some payback for the treatment the Marines were only too happy to give to him. They're strong, be careful. A Marine warned as he held up his gun, getting ready to fire. Still up for a fight, Luffy? Ace asked seriously, looking ready to fight enough for both of them no matter what Luffy said. Of course I can, Luffy answered fiercely, as if determined to show Ace that he didn't need him to worry about him anymore. Ace looked like he wanted to contract that statement, but there wasn't time for that right now with enemies surrounding them, shouting out orders to stop them. Instead, he just smirked and told him, I never once thought I'd see the day when you would save me, for once. He looked at him from the corner of his eyes and added, thanks, Luffy. What a lecture he would have gotten later on for all the stunts he pulled, Robin said softly, knowing that if they had escaped from here alive, Ace would have probably beaten Luffy to within an inch of his life for scaring him so much throughout this war. Though she knew that Luffy would have happily have traded that for the alternative. Luffy chuckled as he rubbed his finger under his nose and answered, well, I couldn't have done it without Old Man Whitebeard and his men to help me. Don't be modest now, pal. Tell him you're the best. Usopp called loudly, unable to believe that Luffy could brush off all that madness from the last 2 days without a care in the world. Don't think you're safe yet. A Marine shouted bravely as both brothers' eyes shadowed over dangerously, their touching reunion put on hold. You will die where you stand. They opened fire, but in their desperation to stop them, they had completely forgotten that they had devil fruit powers. They were firing ordinary bullets at them, which were proven when they simply went through Ace as he turned to flames, and how when Luffy caught them so that they stretched his skin out before he sent them right back to their senders. Don't these Marines ever learn? Nami said, actually feeling embarrassed for them. I guess that it's good for us, Frankie stated with a snort. Otherwise they might have been able to get all of us a long time ago. I guess they used up all their sea prism stone bullets at the start of the war. Usopp offered. Where did they get all that stuff anyway? Sanji couldn't help but ask. That stuff is everywhere these days. Yes, Robin sighed as Chopper and Brook nodded grimly in agreement, it's becoming a real problem. But they tried not to think about anything negative as they watched the two mop the floor with the Marines. Once they realized that they might as well be throwing marshmallows at them, and that Luffy was able to send their own weapons right back at them, they pulled out blades instead. They charged right at Luffy, who looked around them, looking ready to dodge until Ace stepped in and saved him the trouble. Ace jumped up, actually doing a handstand on his brother's head until Luffy was forced down into a kind of squat and down low enough that he was out of harm's way. The swords hit Ace instead, with their blades going right through his body, as he smirked at them. He's my little brother, he informed them as if they were being rude. So I'd appreciate it if you'd back off. Ace then used Luffy like a springboard and actually propelled himself into the air where he spun around to face them all. Fire Fist, he yelled before he sent his signature attack right at them, forcing them to run once again to avoid getting burned. Super awesome. Frankie cheered out as Chopper and Usopp both jumped up and down, cheering both brothers on. Kick some ass and take names. Sanji laughed, feeling lighter than he had in a long time.
Yo, quick pause, smash that like button, hit subscribe if you're new here, share this video, and tell me in the comments which part you're loving the most.
It was so good to see that, for the moment, everything was going right for them. Ace may have been beaten and injured, but he was far from weak, and now that those chains were finally off, he was showing them all just how out of their league they were. Not that Luffy was going to let himself be outdone now. Even as Chopper let out a yell of anger and fear at the sight of Luffy continuing to perform his more dangerous attacks. Second gear, he shouted as he pumped blood with his legs once more as 3 Marines tried to corner him, dropping down at him with their swords. Luffy disappeared at the last second so that the blades struck the ground and left them stunned as to where he went. It took most of the Straw Hats a minute to see where he was now, having jumped up into the air and somersaulting over and over before he stretched his leg out and did a jet stamp to take them down. Just then, Ace suddenly landed on his feet as he held up his fingers and pointed them out like he had a pair of pistols before he began to fire, literally fire, bullets made of small flames out. Fire gun, he declared as the Marines tried to dodge, but unlike he and Luffy, there was nothing they could do to avoid these guns. Ace managed to hit every one of them in his line of sight, but was so focused on this that he did seem to notice that there was another Marine with a giant spiked mace lunging at him from behind. Die, Fire Fist, he shouted. Luffy got there before the Marine could even touch Ace however, kicking him out of the way and he fell in a heap with Luffy landing right next to his brother. It was too much for them, the Marines knew that they were hopelessly outmatched, knowing that they couldn't take one of them on, much less both of them working together like this. Luffy and Ace's teamwork was just perfect. It was like they were reading each other's minds, just sensing what the other was about to do and knew just what they had to do to match it. Oh wow, Chopper cried out in amazement. Truly amazing, Brook said in awe. I have never seen 2 people fight together so flawlessly. I guess that they fought together so much that they know just what the other's gonna do, Nami said. Now she didn't understand this warrior's way, like the rest of the boys here, but even she could see just how unstoppable these 2 were together. They were wild and free when they were fighting, like this was just what they were put here for, and they loved every moment of it. And so they play off each other's strengths while covering up for their weaknesses. Even an army of Marines knew that they couldn't hope to match them. With both of the boys smiling, as if drinking in this moment of freedom, they cleared enough of the Marines away that they were left with an open path. Let's move, Luffy, Ace called, time for us to get out of here. You won't get any complaints from me. Usopp shouted as Luffy looked back at Ace and beamed even wider as he agreed wholeheartedly. But Usopp was only forcing that happy smile on his own face as his insides were now writhing around in agony. He didn't want to see what was going on next, he was now wishing with all his heart that he could do something to change the past, to make sure that Luffy and Ace both escaped together. He just couldn't see how it could have gone so wrong when they snatched victory here from the jaws of defeat. How could Ace have died after coming so far? He did his best to put that out of his mind as he ran with the others after the 2, who had joined up with the rest of Whitebeard's forces, clearing a path to the bay for them all. The Marines gave chase, but both jumped into the air with Ace spinning upside down and holding up his hands so that a green light ignited and he created tiny balls of fire like fireflies and sent them down at their pursuers. The balls burst into explosions, burning the Marines, with Luffy following up with a Gatling gun right after it so that he punched out any of the Marines that Ace missed. Seeing the 2 of them fight seemed to lift morale, not just with the Straw Hats but with all of Whitebeard's forces as well. It seemed to light a fire in them all as they cheered and began to fight their way back to their ships, having gotten what they came here for and left Marine HQ in shambles. It was a victory for them all and now all they had to do was make it back to the sea. Luffy was fighting side by side with Ace the whole way back as they ran to the wall, and as they ran, the Straw Hats couldn't help but think back to when those 2 were still children. How they would race each other through the forest with Luffy always struggling behind to keep up with Ace but refusing to give up as he fought hard to catch up. Now, though, they were running together. Here, Luffy was not only able to keep going, but he was now strong enough to run by his side. It was amazing to think about how much that little boy had grown after all that time, and maybe Ace could sense that as he looked over at him with pride in his eyes. He looked at him long and hard before he smiled and informed Luffy, "You've gotten strong, Luffy." "Oh," Robin said, and she actually sounded a little teary. "That's so sweet." It was too much for Frankie and Brook as they both started crying at those words. "Damn, why are they always doing this to me?" Frankie shouted as he sobbed, his head turned sideways as tears fell like from floodgate. "Are they trying to kill me? 'Cause they're doing a good job here. It's so heartwarming." Brook broke down, almost having to be dragged along after them because he just couldn't stop crying. "Though I know I no longer have a heart, it fills my chest with such a warmth. Though I don't really have a chest either, yo-ha-ho-ho. But we all know that Luffy's strong." Chopper called out in confusion. "True," Zoro answered lightly, "but as far as I know, that was the first time that I think that we ever heard Ace come right out and admit it. He used to give Luffy such a hard time and called him a weakling when they were little, remember?" Chopper thought it over before he looked up at the 2 brothers again. Luffy had gasped silently as he stared at Ace, who was still smiling at him. Then, at last, he smiled back and Chopper understood. He knew just how much that Luffy cared about and admired Ace. Since they had first met, Ace had been his biggest motivation to grow stronger, yet also someone whom he dreamt of matching someday. And someday, Luffy informed him determinedly, I'll surpass even you. Ace just smirked a little wider, but not as if he was mocking Luffy, it was as if he knew what Luffy was saying was true. But their moving scene didn't last long, for at that moment they stopped dead in their tracks when someone stood in their way. Damn it, don't these admirals know when to give up? Sanji shouted out exasperatedly. It turned out that it was Aokiji who had stepped in, ready to try his hand at stopping them, while, instinctively, Ace stopped and held up a hand to freeze Luffy as well, silently warning him to stand back. Well, until then, let me protect you a little longer, he told Luffy as he moved protectively in front of him so that he was facing Aokiji. I don't know, can Ace stand up to an admiral? Nami gulped down, remembering how easily that he was able to take out Luffy, Sanji, and Zoro all in just one blow. I mean, I know he's strong, but he's a mess here too. I wouldn't worry too much, Robin said seriously. Now, she knew that Ace had to have died somewhere between here and making it to the sea, but she couldn't bring herself to believe that it was Aokiji who did it. But then, who could have? But the rest of her thoughts were drowned out as Aokiji started to speak. You will surpass him someday. He repeated, but how can you do that when you have no tomorrow? Neither of you are getting out of here, alive. Yet as he spoke, there didn't seem to be any anger in him. He was cold, yes, but Robin was a little surprised that she could feel any kind of hatred in him despite the fact that they were now escaping and making a mockery of the Marines. That man was just as difficult to figure out as Luffy most of the time. Admiral Kuzan, cried a Marine in relief, thinking that he was going to put a stop to it all. That's, Luffy muttered, and the Straw Hats felt nervous once again. Luffy couldn't take another big battle in the condition that he was in. Ace knew that as well as they did, however, and took charge as Aokiji's arm was suddenly coated in ice. Get back, Luffy, Ace commanded before the fire was turned on once again and the two began a face-off. Fire versus ice, Nami said, quickly weighing his chances as Luffy got a safe distance away. Well, with their elements, Ace definitely has the upper hand, but that's not guarantee of victory, Sanji agreed, knowing that this could go either way. He had hoped that this war would have been enough to weaken the admirals to a point that they would be easier to fight. Leave it to an admiral to be so damn persistent. Ace had seen better days, but after being forced to just sit and watch his friends and family do all the fighting, he wasn't sitting back and taking it anymore. He stood his ground as Aokiji took aim with his frozen arm and cried out, Ice block pheasant peck. And out of his arm burst a massive wave of ice in the shape of a pheasant appeared, bolting straight for Ace. Mirror flame, Ace cried as he unleashed a great wall of fire to block the ice. It seemed to be a deadlock, but then Ace managed to melt the head of the bird's form with his fire, and then they suddenly cancelled each other out as a blast of mist was released in its wake, and when it cleared, there wasn't anything left. Amazing, Usopp shouted out, his eyes bugging out of his head. He's as strong as a Marine admiral. He got rid of all that ice in just one attack. Frankie thundered as he punched the air. Not that I would have expected anything less from Ace, Robin added, though even she was amazed that someone was able to stand against Aokiji one-on-one. She remembered bitterly just how strong he was over 20 years ago, and that wasn't something that you could forget that easily. Go, Ace, go for it, Frankie cheered on eagerly as the Marines were all looking stunned by the display. But now wasn't the time for them to spend their time and energy fighting, everyone was injured and exhausted, and they needed to leave fast. They had to reserve whatever strength they had left in surviving now. Under the cover of the mist, Ace grabbed hold of Luffy as he led the way away from Aokiji and back to where his friends and crew were waiting for them all. Even Nami could understand the reasons for behind this. As much as she was sure that Ace wanted to keep fighting, he had a job of protecting Luffy, who was now almost a walking dead man. She shuddered, feeling sick with herself for even thinking that. Oh, she was going to make sure that Chopper gave him a full checkup when they got him back. He was going to need one because she was going to clobber him for scaring them like this. Yet as she was just thinking about her plans on beating him up, something new happened. At first, she had thought that it was another attack from Marines, but instead it was the huge paddle ship that the Whitebeard pirates had first entered the plaza with the help of oars. Marines were screaming and scrambling to avoid getting run over by the massive ship that was digging its way through the concrete to reach the Marines' main forces right in front of them. Yet the pirates were all just as shocked at seeing that thing move as the Marines, all of them shouting out in confusion, asking what was going on and who was on board. Usopp moved his goggles down so that he could get better look at who it was, and he spotted a large number of pirates standing on top of the ship, but he recognized the one standing out in front almost at once. It's him, he shouted. It's that Squirtle guy from before. The guy who stabbed Whitebeard because he thought that he sold them out. What the hell does he think he's doing? Sanji shouted as they instinctively moved back to avoid getting run over, though they were perfectly safe from it.
Yo, quick pause, smash that like button, hit subscribe if you're new here, share this video, and tell me in the comments which part you're loving the most. Though Squirtle saved them the trouble of wondering. Old man, everyone, use this chance to run.
Squirtle screamed out from the top of the ship as they tore up the ground and continued onwards with surprising speed. We'll stay behind and cover your retreat. Is he nuts? Nami shouted out in horror, he's gonna get himself killed. I think that's the point, Nami-san, Brook said, shaking his head. That fool. It's guilt, Zoro snarled as he frowned heavily. Damn it, he's not looking to do the right thing here, he wants to be punished for what he did to Whitebeard. This is no different than suicide. He wasn't the only one thinking that, for his crewmates on the ground were all shouting up the same thing. Don't be an idiot, Squirtle. You'll die if you do this. Are you planning on killing yourself? Now that's something, Chopper said, looking around at them all. He stabbed their own captain like that and they still want him to live. They already forgave him. Yes, but them forgiving him isn't the problem here, Brook answered seriously. They had seen the grief and guilt when he realized that he had been tricked and attacked someone that he had come to see as a father. He can't forgive himself. That's why he's doing this. He thinks that he can make it up to them by letting himself die here. And he seemed to have guessed it right on the spot, for Squirtle shouted out, of course I do. I deserve to die for stabbing Pops like that. It may not atone for my crime, but I won't be satisfied unless I do this. Squirtle turned to look at his crew behind him, as if he was telling them to leave as well, but they seemed just as determined as he did, and they even began to cheer when he raised his sword up high and declared, now, all of you, take Ace and get out of here as fast as you can. He's lost his mind, Chopper yelled in terror, not wanting to see any more people have to die for no reason. Squirtle, shouted Marco from nearby, who was still bleeding heavily and struggling to remove the shackle off his wrist. He turned to some of his crewmates and was yelling at them to hurry up and get it off them, but they seemed at a loss as to how to unlock it for him without a key. Squirtle, Ace shouted out in horror, staring up at him, looking ready to stop him himself. Looks like Ace forgave him too, Nami gulped down, wondering if he was going to try and stop this. There was nothing for him to forgive, in his eyes, Robin said grimly. I don't think that there's anyone out there who hates Roger as much as he does, and he understands Squirtle's feelings. I'm sure he does, why Squirtle did it and why he's doing this now. And so he wants to stop anyone else dying for his sake. This seemed to be the last hurrah for Squirtle, but to their shock, the ship suddenly stopped. It was still trying to move forward, but now it was as if they hit some kind of blockage to prevent it from going any further. The paddles roared and grunted as they continued to try to keep moving, but soon, whatever was blocking it, had won out and the ship stopped completely. What was that? Sanji yelled, quickly running around to the other side of the ship to see what it was. They hit a shit wall or something. And he stopped dead when he saw what, or rather who, it was that had stopped it. Holy, he couldn't even finish the swearing. Huh, Squirtle yelled as he glared down. Hey, what happened? Why aren't we going anywhere? Something's made the ship stop. One of his crewmates shouted as the rest of the Straw Hats ran to join Sanji. Right under the ship's massive front, Whitebeard was standing there, still bleeding heavily, but was more than able to stop the ship's rampage with a single hand. He stopped that ship on his own like that. Usopp screamed. He's got a freaking hole in his chest and he's still capable of doing something like this. You gotta admit that he earned his reputation several times over, Zoro said, a light in his eyes. Oh, what a way to go out in the world, knowing that you were the strongest and able to show it despite age. What is he? Chopper cried out in fear. With all of the injuries that he gotten since coming here, as well as his health even before he came to Marineford. And he was still this strong to stop an entire ship with one hand. He had to be some kind of god or demon to be able to keep standing after all this. I don't know how much longer he can keep standing, even for him though. Brook gulped in fear as he watched Whitebeard glaring up at Squirtle as if he were a child who his parent told him not to misbehave but ended up breaking something after all. Well, he looks like he's about to drop dead at any moment, but so far he's holding up. Usopp pointed out quickly. Doesn't matter. Chopper shouted angrily. He's in even worse shape than Luffy is. He's not leaving this battle alive. Old man, Squirtle yelled in shock when he saw him. What are you doing? I'm stopping you from making a huge mistake, you idiot. Whitebeard answered, panting as he did. The effort of stopping the ship seemed to be too much for him. Squirtle, I can't believe you would do this. Don't you know how disrespectful it is for his sons to die before their father? Did you actually think that little prick of yours hurt me? You fool. I'm not so weak to die from your blade, but everyone grows old and dies eventually. Brook nodded at those words. He understood those words completely. After all, he was 90 years old, and though he oftentimes missed his youth of skin and muscle, he liked who he was now as well. After all, how else could he make so many skull jokes about himself? Whitebeard turned from the ship and his men as he stood against the Marines once again. Seeing him walk forward again drew everyone's attention and they watched, wondering just what his next command was going to be. Even the Marines seemed unable to turn their attention away from him as they prepared themselves for more war. We've already done what we came here to do, Whitebeard said, though there was something different in his tone, a kind of grim satisfaction. Some of his men behind him were calling out to him, wondering just what was wrong before Whitebeard spoke up again. Our business here is finished, he commanded before he coughed violently and more blood burst out of his mouth. Hey, stop. Chopper couldn't help but cry out instinctively. You're hurt too bad too. And now, Whitebeard began again before he stood tall. Listen up, Whitebeard pirates. These are my final orders as your captain. Final, you mean? Usopp croaked out, feeling himself shrinking at every word he heard. He knows that he's beyond saving, Sanji sighed grimly. He's chosen here as his place to die. The Marines may like to believe that they killed him, but I see it now. It's like with Roger. What are you talking about? Nami asked, feeling cold inside at the thought of hearing the final orders from your captain. Roger turned himself into the Marines, Zoro answered, getting what the cook was saying. They claimed that they captured him when that wasn't the case at all. Whitebeard knows that he's dying and he chose to die here. He gave a rather awful smirk as he added, he was calling the shots here from the start. The Marines may tell themselves otherwise, but I can see the truth here. Wait, cried one of the Whitebeard pirates. What does he mean by final orders? Pops, what are you saying? Screamed another. Don't talk like that, Pops. A third cried. I don't want to hear you say something like that. You said that we were going back to the New World, together. And suddenly every one of the Whitebeard pirates let out similar cries of disbelief and anguish at the thought of leaving here without him. But one voice spoke up slightly louder than the rest. Old man. It was Ace. His eyes were wide with a kind of terror that they had seen all throughout this war. He guessed right away what this all meant. It's time for us to part ways. Whitebeard bellowed out for them all to hear. You must survive and return to the New World without me. He's planning on dying here all alone. Usopp shouted out, sickened with the thought of going out all by yourself like this. This is his choice, Brooke said grimly, accepting what was going on even if he didn't like it. He may not have ever met Whitebeard in person, but he didn't need to for him to see just what type of man that he was. A great man, a true leader and captain who loved his crew more than his own life. Yet he was also right, you can't fight against age forever. No matter how strong you are, you can never be on top forever. There wasn't a single pirate here who wanted to hear his order and they were all yelling out in protest, yelling that they weren't going to leave him like this and that they were going back together. There must be something that they can do. Usopp yelled, not wanting to see such a powerful man stay behind for everyone's sake. He's their father to each and every one of them, Sanji stated sadly, no one likes to see the one whom they come to see as a father figure die. Captain or not, he thought about Chef Zeph and thought back to when he was being held hostage by that stupid Jin at gunpoint and was afraid that something would happen to him. It's never an easy thing to see someone you respect and admire be seen at such a weak moment. But Whitebeard had enough of their whining and slammed his foot down to silence them all. I'm a relic of a bygone era. He shouted, holding up a massive fist. There is no ship that can carrying me on to the new age. And without a second thought, he slammed his fist in the air to create another earthquake, destroying what's left of the shambles that the island was in. Go, my men. The earthquake that he created knocked most of the few standing Marines off their feet as the ground cracked apart beneath them, creating deep gorges below that showed nothing but the darkness of the earth. That was when the Straw Hats realized that he wasn't giving his men a choice anymore, he was making sure they left without him one way or the other. Even if they refused to go to the sea without him, he was making sure that they couldn't reach and help him any longer. Almost none of the Marines were left standing in the wake of Whitebeard's attack, all of them being tossed around as if caught in a great storm as the ground continued to separate and crack. The sound of it alone was enough to make them deaf and they couldn't even hear as Frankie bellowed out, is he trying to destroy the whole freaking island? But still they watched, always making sure that they stuck with Luffy, who didn't want to let his brother out of his sights, and stuck close to him. They were just barely able to stay on their feet as the more pirates were desperate to get back to Whitebeard. The pirates were all practically in tears, horrified and sickened at the thought of leaving him here, but this was an order that they could not refuse. Some of the more level-headed pirates were pulling at their comrades who were struggling to rejoin with Whitebeard, holding them back though they didn't like this any more than they did. No, please, Pops, this is the captain's orders. We must go. We must survive and make it back to the New World. It's Pop's command. He may not have been the Pirate King, Zoro stated as even Luffy and Ace were shouting out at Whitebeard. But he doesn't need that title. I know that the world may not remember him like this, that he will always be remembered as a monster, Robin said, and there was a little smile there, but from this point of view, he looks more like a hero than anything else. Hopefully, he won't mind that like some morons I know, Nami said as she glanced at Zoro and Luffy. Honestly, how those two describe heroes, she will never understand it. Those two were practically made for each other, alright. Whitebeard only continued to grin, as if he was loving every moment of this before he held up his weapon, ready to continue. It has been a long journey, he declared, but I think that it's high time we finish this once and for all. Marines. Marineford shook worse than ever as earthquakes were sent all over the island, buildings were crumbling and Marines were now running scared. Marineford is falling apart at the seams. Someone, stop Whitebeard. Stop him. Frankie roared out over the noise, dude, unless you know how to stop a force of nature, I don't see how you can stop him. Zoro hung on, trying to ignore his aching eardrums as he looked at Whitebeard's silent determination. He could see that look in his eyes and he knew what he was going to do, for Whitebeard knew that it was only going to be a matter of time before his own time ran out. But until then, it was either him or the Marines, and if it was going to be him, he was damn determined to take them with him when he did. "This is crazy," cried out one of the Marines. "Whitebeard's really gonna destroy the entire island." "Go for it," Sanji shouted out to Whitebeard, knowing that this place was just an eyesore anyway. The Marines were corrupted and abused their power, and so, in his eyes, it might be for the best to level this whole place. "Pops!" The Whitebeard pirates cried out after him, most of them still wanting to stay and do something to help. "I don't want to leave you behind. Let's go back together. Please, you gotta come with us. Pops, don't go." But their cries just seemed to annoy Whitebeard more than anything else. Without even looking back at them, he barked out angrily, "Are you disobeying your captain's orders? Get going, you imbeciles." How can he think that they would leave him without a second thought? Nami demanded, sadness in her eyes. "That's like us leaving Luffy behind to die. Sure, that idiot does stupid stunts all the time, but we know that he's going to make it back sooner or later. Here, he's doing what Squirtle was doing. He's killing himself." "Not really," Brook countered grimly. "He's already dying and he knows it. He doesn't have much time left anyway, so, instead, he's decided that he will do whatever it takes to make his last few moments here mean something." "Yeah, but," Nami began as Chopper shook his head miserably. He didn't need to look at Whitebeard's injuries to know that they were bad. Even with a team of the best doctors in the world there, he doubted that there was any doctor was skilled enough to do something to save him anymore. Whitebeard was too far gone. Zoro glanced down at him and sympathized when saw that miserable look on his face. "If you knew that you were going to die at any moment, what would you do?" he suddenly asked, and they looked up at him. "Imagine it, your time is up, and you can feel your strength leaving you fast. Would just sit around and wait for the end, or would you give everyone something to remember you by?" "I don't care if it was my last hurrah, I'm making sure that I take as many of those bastards with me as possible," Frankie had to agree. If it were him, he'd drag this whole stupid island down with him if he thought that it would leave an impression. What a way to go. The Marines were shooting Whitebeard once again in a desperate attempt to stop him, filling him with bullets, yet they were taken out of the picture when he sent another quake right at them. He was buying time for his men to get away, though they were still struggling to do such a thing as leave him behind. "Kill Whitebeard," shouted a Marine captain. "He's on last legs. He can't keep standing for much longer." Whitebeard raised his weapon up at those words and slammed it onto the ground with such force that anyone in front of its destructive path was sent flying. "Pops!" cried a tearful pirate as he was being held back by his shipmate. "No, don't," his crewmate shouted back at him, holding him back despite the tears in his eyes. "I know it's hard, but we have to what Pops said." "I'm sorry." And with an effort, he dragged his friend with him, heading back to the sea, both of them having tears falling fast and not at all ashamed by them. One by one, the Whitebeard pirates and their allies were moving, heading back to their ships, but they kept looking back, as if hoping that they would hear another order from Whitebeard. "What a guy," Usopp gulped, staring in amazement at the aged pirate in front of them, who was taking on the entire army of Marines single-handedly, and more than able to hold them back. "He's doing all this, not just for Ace, but for everyone. He's just," he couldn't even think of a word to describe what he was seeing. "He really was something else," Robin said softly. "I am glad that I got to see him just once, even if it is in a memory. But I can't help but feel bad for his crew though," Brook said miserably, watching the pirates continue to head towards their ships, with only a handful of them staying behind to watch Whitebeard fight one last time, pride and honor in each one of their faces as they watched him wipe the ground with the Marines. "I know the pain of being forced to leave your captain behind. It felt like my heart was being ripped right out of my body. Even today, it still hurts thinking back to that day when I said goodbye to Captain Yorkie." "Right, you told us about him," Nami said sadly as Chopper reached up to take hold of his hand and held on, which Brook was grateful for and squeezed his hoof back gently. "It's in times like that where a true captain must think what is best for the crew," Zoro said grimly, patting Brook on the shoulder. "Don't blame yourself. You were following his orders." Brook sighed. "I know," he said sadly, "but, thinking about it now, it's like the idea of leaving Luffy-san behind to die. I already had to say goodbye to one captain and I rather give up my life than to ever go through something like that again." The memory of seeing Captain Yorkie lying in that bed with those spots and that mask over his normally smiling face was something that haunted him for years. He remembered seeing those tears fall as he cried out that he just couldn't stand the thought of leaving. The captain had tried to keep a positive attitude and put a strong front up for the sake of the rest of the crew, but Brook couldn't bring himself to leave until he heard Captain Yorkie's last orders. He could still feel that cold, clammy hand on his own as Yorkie held it and started to cry, confessing just how much pain he was in and how he regretted it. Brook sealed those words into his very soul as he knelt down at his bedside and begged for him to live, so that they could meet again and things could be like they were before. He sometimes wondered what would have happened if he ignored the orders to leave him and the other sick members of the crew behind and they remained with him. Though he had a good idea what would have happened, would they all have come down with the same illness? Would he have died from the same disease that took his captain and several of his friends away from him? Would they have found a cure perhaps, and would they have made it the rest of the way across the Grand Line? He wasn't sure anymore, but to see someone as strong as Captain Yorkie so sick like that hurt him more than dying did. He had decided that he would never have to go through that again, but when he saw Luffy strapped to that table and scream in agony as he tried to fight the poison, it was as if he was back there that day to when the Rumbar pirates separated. I cannot go through that again, he whispered quietly to himself. Not ever again. The Straw Hats were looking at him, and they could guess what he was thinking about as he looked over at Luffy when he said those words. They could all understand the pain of leaving someone they cared about behind, and agreed that they weren't going to let that happen again, not if they had a say in the matter. Ace had stood there for some time, not wanting to leave that spot as he stared at Whitebeard's back and tried to come to terms with what was about to happen. Whitebeard wasn't leaving this place and was trying to grasp this fact as Luffy continued to stand with him. Even he understood what was happening here, and he wanted to help Ace through this, but there wasn't time. They had to go, and now. Ace, come on, Luffy pleaded to him as he continued to stare at Whitebeard, his eyes shadowed over. Yeah, Ace, this is the worst place you can be right now. Nami couldn't help but shout. I know it must be hard for you, but you can't stay. Come on, shouted one of the pirates behind them. We can steal one of the marines' battleships and sail out of here. Get ready to set sail, exclaimed another as the pirates began to run past them all, with Luffy still there, staring at his brother who didn't seem likely to move anytime soon. What's wrong? Chopper cried out desperately, why isn't he leaving with the rest of them? He feels like it's his fault that Whitebeard's here in the first place, Sanji said loudly over the noise. He must be feeling a lot of guilt here that someone he really looks up to is going to die because he wanted to save him. Damn, that's gotta mess with you. But there's no time, Usopp shouted out, shaking his head hard. He didn't want to think about this now, that if they had left a little earlier, then maybe Ace could've, he might not have. Straw Hat Boy, Ivankov shouted over the dim, already halfway to the shore as well. What are you waiting around for? Luffy looked back at him, he nodded to him, letting him know that he knew that they had to leave now before he looked back to Ace and pleaded, Ace, let's go. The old-timer made his choice. Just go, Frankie shouted, hoping against hope that this memory could still have a happy ending if they started running now. Please, Ace, mourn for him when you get on the ship. I know, Ace said at last, not looking at Luffy. I won't waste his efforts. Oh, why did he have to say that? Frankie sobbed out, wanting to just cover his ears and block it all out. Damn it, why do we have to know what's gonna happen? I don't want to watch anymore. Chopper shouted, covering his eyes as if he thought that Ace was going to drop dead at any moment. But Ace held up a fist and shot a great burst of fire right at the Marines who were now attempting to swarm Whitebeard from behind. Get out of the way. He shouted at them angrily, all of you. What he was planning on doing, they understood when Ace created a great wall of flames around both him and Whitebeard, giving them a chance to talk one last time. But what surprised them all, or maybe not so much, was when Ace dropped to his knees and bowed his head so low that his head was touching the ground. The Straw Hats didn't know what to say when they saw that gesture. Though some of them had never met him in person, they felt that they had gotten to know Ace very well during their trip into these memories. He was a strong-willed and stubborn person, but to see him put his pride aside for someone else like this showed just how grateful he was for everything that Whitebeard had done for him and how much that he admired and respected him. Ace, Usopp whimpered, feeling close to tears when he remembered the first time he bowed his head like that for someone else. He remembered seeing the Sunny sailing away from him and how he might never get another chance to say what he wanted them all to know. He may have acted like an ungrateful, spoiled brat the day that he left, but he never forgot just how much he cared and admired Luffy and the other Straw Hats. Even if the thought that they were never going to take him back, he wanted to at least let them know just what they meant to him and how sorry he was for being such an idiot. Whitebeard turned to look at Ace, not saying anything for the longest moment. There's no need for words, Whitebeard finally said after a moment when he saw Ace on the ground, compassion in his eyes showing that he knew everything that Ace wanted to say. But before you go, answer one question for me, Ace. Were you happy with me as your father? Ah, Nami said, tears welling up in her eyes at the question, and even more so when Ace lifted his head to look at Whitebeard one last time before he bowed again. Of course you were, he cried out, and they could tell from the choked up words that he was close to crying, if not already doing so. That's, oh I can't take it. Frankie broke down completely. I must write a song for this. Brook also cried, falling over and sobbing with his face pressed up against the ground. Blood doesn't mean anything when it comes to family. The answer that he heard seemed to have been enough for Whitebeard as he smiled and let out a loud laugh as if he heard a funny joke. As the fire died down, Ace stood up, finally ready to leave, and Luffy followed right behind as they both bolted towards the other pirates preparing to leave. It truly looked like this was the last stretch, with Ace saved and Whitebeard buying them time to make it out of there. It seemed that both of the brothers would make it out of this mess. Hurry, run to the ship, it's time to go, Ace, Luffy-kun, shouted another familiar voice, and they looked behind them in surprise to see Jinbei had reappeared, running to catch up with them and making sure that he ran behind the two of them so that he could protect them from any stray attack. Jinbei, they both yelled when they saw him there. They're specifically targeting you too. He told them both seriously, knowing that they weren't safe just yet. It's Pop's last wish that every last one of his men gets away from this place, alive. He's right, Robin panted as they fought to keep up with them as well, watching in sadness as Jinbei turned his head back to look at Whitebeard with tears shining in his eyes this time. With Ace escaping, there's no chance that they will take this lying down. If there's a chance that they can still get him and Luffy, then they'll take it. But what about all the other pirates here? Sanji shouted out, worried, glancing back and wondering just how long Whitebeard was able to hold them back. There's a whole army. Doesn't matter, Zoro said through gritted teeth. They see these two as the biggest threats. They don't care if the others escape so long as they can get Luffy and Ace. But onwards they kept running, listening to Whitebeard's attacks and the screams of the Marines as they were being crushed. Most of the pirates had already made it to the bay and they were boarding their own ships as well as several battleships. Everyone, one of the pirates shouted from a nearby the warship, waving them over, get on board. We managed to capture this ship. Hurry up, they're almost out, Chopper shouted, terror gripping his heart. They were about to escape to freedom. They were almost there. So, how could shit have hit the fan here? Sanji shouted out furiously, making Chopper stumble and almost fall in mid-run. Look, they're almost there. How could Ace have? How? He grunted angrily and looked away, unable to finish his sentence. I don't know, Nami whimpered, hugging herself as she tried to grasp what was going on. Was it possible that the memory was wrong or something? What were they missing here? She shook her head, she didn't want to watch. She didn't want to know, she couldn't bear the thought of seeing Ace die after all this. No one said anything for a moment as they continued to run, unable to admit what they knew was going to come any moment. They never once took their eyes off the two of them, as if thinking that if they made sure they stayed together then they could save Ace. But they all felt sick inside at the thought that one of these two was never going to leave this place alive. But by then, they heard more screams coming behind them. Ah, look out, here comes Akainu, again. Akainu, Robin gasped, turning back in time to see the Admiral turned his arm into magma before he sent his fist at a group of pirates. She had to wince and look away as they were hit and the ground blew up around them. Did you truly expect to escape from me? How optimistic, he cried out, his voice dripping with malice as he sent another attack out, his arm billowing out thick clouds of smoke. Ace looked as if he was using all of his willpower to keep going forward, hating himself for leaving his comrades and his crewmates behind to die. The Straw Hats all looked back, unable to help themselves as they watched Akainu continue to walk forward. But what surprised them all was how relaxed he was taking this, as if he was just taking a stroll. It was like he was expecting the pirates to come running at him when they were ready to die and that there was no point in giving chase. For some reason, they couldn't turn their eyes away from him as Jinbei was shouting at Luffy and Ace to just keep running to the ship and not to stop for anything. Humph, Akainu scoffed before he openly mocked, you managed to free Fire Fist Ace, and then you turn and run away like a dog with his tail tucked between legs, The Whitebeard pirates are nothing more than a pack of cowards. What did that jerk say? Usopp demanded furiously. Who's he calling a coward? Don't listen, Zoro retorted as several other pirates heard his words and also stopped to glare at him, as if they were in half a mind to go back and make him eat those words. He's trying to make them angry. Angry people make stupid mistakes. And he's not above killing them for stupid mistakes. Usopp glared at Zoro before he breathed hard, nodding in agreement, getting ready to start running again as one of the commanders barked at them not to let him provoke them. Yes, it's a simple tactic, but it can be effective if you know the right buttons to push, Robin said in understanding. But then she stopped, her eyes widening as she remembered something. She thought back to that night of the Great Terminal Fire and what Ace did there as well as his words. Was it possible that the reason he died was? But before she could finish thinking that horrible thought, Akainu started speaking up again, this time a little louder than before so that they couldn't miss his words. However, considering who your leader is, it doesn't come as a surprise to me, he declared. After all, Whitebeard is a loser from a bygone era. Ace's eyes widened with silent rage as he stopped dead in his tracks, not that the Straw Hats noticed at first. They couldn't care less what Akainu said and stuck close to Luffy, but Luffy knew, or maybe suspected that something like this would happen. He stopped running as well and turned around to where Ace was standing, his eyes burning with a different kind of fire. Luffy, Ace, what are you doing? Nami yelled angrily. I was afraid of this, Robin said, shaking her head and suddenly having a bad feeling what might have happened. He stopped running because he was angry. Ace, Luffy yelled as Akainu set his sights on them. What are you doing? No, Usopp gasped, his eyes widening as fear gripped his insides. No, Ace, don't stop, just keep running, don't let him taunt you. But Ace still stood his ground before he snarled, a loser. And he was glaring at Akainu with nothing short of hatred in his eyes as he finished, you take that back. Ace, it's not worth it. Let him talk. Nami cried out in panic, wanting to just slap some sense into him. Zoro gritted his teeth as he watched. He could tell that Ace was already full of pain and guilt over the fact that they were leaving Whitebeard behind, but why waste his efforts in a fight that has nothing to do with anything? Huh? Akainu asked causally, making Ace even angrier. Ace's fists were ablaze as he turned to face him as he snarled, "Take back what you just said." "Hey, forget it, Ace. Don't stop," Chopper shouted out, shaking in fear as he reached out to try and pull him along, but his little hooves went right through him. "They're just words. Don't do it, Ace. Don't stop running," one of his crewmates shouted. "Just let him blabber on. Let's go." Another pirate cried out and pulled on his arm to get him to leave with them, who just pulled himself free, refusing to take another step. "He just badmouthed Pops," he yelled back. "That bastard actually treated Pops like a fool. He's just saying that to get under your skin," Sanji shouted out, wanting to kick some sense into his head. "They're stupid words anyway. Believe me, I can think up a whole lot better insults than that." "Go." Zoro shook his head, having a much clearer picture to why Ace died. He was going to let that bastard Akainu taunt him to his grave, but still, something didn't add up. He was able to fight Aokiji one-on-one and they were even. So how could he be so strong against one admiral, but lost to another? There was a piece of this whole mess that didn't add up and he wasn't sure he wanted to know what it was. "Ace," Luffy yelled, clearly not wanting his brother to stop when they were so close to escaping. "It hasn't changed," Robin said, thinking back to that time that Ace refused to run when he was against that Porchemy. Sabo had scolded him for that bad habit of refusing to run when up against an enemy. "He won't run. And what's that gonna get him?" Nami demanded hysterically. "He's gonna get himself killed if he stops now. This isn't worth dying over. Sticks and stones can break your bones," Robin said softly, remembering hearing that saying all her life. "But words are what really hurt," she added in an afterthought. She remembered how the other kids back at Ohara used to tease her, called her a monster, a witch, a demon. She heard it all. And a lot of the time, that hurt worse than any punch could. "Take it back, you say?" Akainu repeated darkly before he gave a nasty smirk, knowing that he got Ace's attention. "I have no intention of doing so. Face the facts, Ace. Your real father, Gold Roger, managed to conquer the Grand Line and gave his life to start a brand new age. I know that a marine such as myself should not say something like this, but there is no doubt that he deserved the title of the King of the Pirates. Compared to that, what is Whitebeard? I am only speaking the truth." "Shut up," Ace growled, his anger growing at the mention of his father. "This isn't good," Brooke said, looking on in terror, hating that it was all that he could do. "I know that it's awful what he's saying, but everyone knows the truth. It's never a pleasant thing to hear someone you care about and admire being downgraded," Frankie said, thinking back to Tom. "If anyone said something like that about Tom, I'd probably stop too. Even if it meant you could die." Nami asked, though she couldn't help but think back to those years when she was forced to listen to Arlong for bragging how easily he killed her mother and how easily he could kill her sister in her village. She could understand Ace's anger, she could, but she also knew that there was a time and a place and now wasn't it. He could make Akainu pay for what he was saying another day. Now, the most important thing was that he get himself and Luffy out of there. Whitebeard clearly couldn't care less what people said about him, and Ace shouldn't let that bug him either. But Ace was only growing angrier and angrier with every word that he heard. Fire began to lick his body as he actually took a step towards Akainu. It wasn't going to take much more for him to snap completely. After all, Akainu went on silkily, did he even have the guts to face Roger? All that he has ever done is hide away, safe, in a corner of the sea and stay out of trouble. Even to this day there are those fools who claim that Whitebeard's name alone is what upholds peace on various islands. Which is true. Brooke shouted out as he thought about the peace that had been brought to Fishman Island for decades just because they had his flag. That alone was enough to stop the kidnappings and slave trading going on there. How could he just ignore all that Whitebeard had done? But as far as I'm concerned, Akainu went on, he just intimidated all the weaklings and buffed himself up to the status of hero. It's nonsense. If they were such weaklings, why didn't you do something about it? Usopp demanded hotly. You guys were so scared of him that you had to bring an army here just to kill one of his men. If there's anyone here who's intimidating weak pirates and trying to sell themselves off as heroes to the bloody world, it's you Marines. What he said. Chopper yelled furiously. Whitebeard's amazing. Luffy, just drag him away if you have to. Nami shouted at Luffy, who looked close to doing such a thing himself, but knew that he really couldn't stop his big brother like this. Roger was a lot of things, but he maintained his honor his entire life, Akainu proclaimed, Ace's eyes narrowing with rage. Even in death he was hailed as a king. Whitebeard is an eternal loser who never was able to step out of Roger's shadow. That is all he will ever be and everything I said is the truth. That bastard, Sanji snarled, hating Akainu more and more with every word, thinking about Kami and all those beautiful mermaids. He could never forgive those celestial dragons for daring to put those chains on the very jewels of the seas, and yet what do the Marines do? Nothing, this asshole had no right to say anything about what was honorable or not. That was finally enough for Ace, for he started to march up towards Akainu, stepping away from his friends, which was enough to cause panic to settle in for the Straw Hats. They were angry with what they heard too, but they knew that it was all smoke that he was blowing. Luffy could only stand there and watch fearfully as Ace continued to make his way to Akainu, and it hit them just how much blood that he had lost already. He was cut all over and his limbs were trembling slightly, as if the effort of just standing up was becoming difficult for him. "Luffy, you need to get out of there too," Chopper cried out in worry, glaring back at the Whitebeard pirates, who had also frozen to watch the scene. What was wrong with them? Why didn't they do something to help? "Now that I think about it, he's even more pathetic than I thought," Akainu went on. "All of his underlings call him father, or Pops, sailing the seas like some kind of big happy family." "Did someone not hug you when you were little?" Sanji demanded hotly. "That's what the Whitebeard pirates were, truthfully," Robin said knowingly. "They were family, the bonds that they had were stronger than most families after all." "He has no right to mock that," and Robin's fists actually curled up and she was shaking with silent rage. She understood the pain of wanting a place to belong, to have someone there to protect her and tell her that it would be okay in the end. Ace understood that as well. Whitebeard took him and countless others in, people who had been given up on and had nowhere else to go, and gave them a home and a purpose. She remembered that joyous moment when she discovered that very same thing in her life, that the place that she belonged had been in front of her all along. And now that she had found that place, she never wanted to let it go. "Shut up," Ace barked at the Admiral as the other Whitebeard pirates were glaring in rage at Akainu's words. "He reigned the sea for decades, yet he never became a king or gained anything," Akainu stated with a smugness that infuriated them all. In the end, one of his own idiot sons was smooth-talked into stabbing him. And now, he's going to die, trying to protect that same fool. "Gained nothing," Frankie shouted out, staring around him at all the pirates who had pledged their loyalty to that same loser, and he felt his own anger grow. "It looks to me that he had everything. There truly is nothing that we can leave behind but our bones, and our memories," Brook said softly. "It may not seem like much to him, but to all the people who loved and admired Whitebeard, they will make sure that he will never be forgotten." "Which is more than can be said about that asshole," Sanji said, with a cold look at Akainu. "I bet that there won't be a single tear shed for him when he finally croaks." "I know I sure won't be crying," Frankie snapped. "Now, isn't that what you call a failed life?" Akainu questioned. "I said shut up," Ace roared as his fires continued to burn and he was looking ready to start charging. "Whitebeard, tell him to just keep going," Nami cried to Whitebeard, hoping that he would notice and snap at Ace not to stand around. "Don't fall for it, Ace. Turn back," cried out one of the commanders as others started to yell out his name. But still, Ace ignored them all as he focused on beating the crap out of Akainu. The others were silent as they watched, now understanding that it had to be because of this stubbornness that would seal Ace's fate. Ace lost what was left of his patience as his hands burst into flames and aimed them at Akainu. "No," he shouted out to his pleading crewmates. "I am not running away from this bastard." He then hollered in a venomous tone to the Admiral, "The old man gave us a place to belong. You people will never understand Pop's greatness." Akainu just looked at Ace like he was scum at the bottom of his shoe. "People who live outside the law do not deserve to live at all," he declared. "There is no place for pirates like you to belong to. Doesn't matter what Ace would have done with his life even if he didn't become a pirate." Frankie yelled furiously. "They don't think he should have lived at all. So it's a good thing that it doesn't matter what that bastard thinks. Cut it out," Ace screamed in fury, his fire burning so hot that it looked ready to start melting the ground around him. "Whitebeard will die a loser," Akainu taunted. A fitting end for the leader of a band of human trash. "I'll give you trash," Usopp yelled, his eyes seeing red as Brook's hands twitched to go to his sword and freeze him already. Ace seemed to have just lost it by those last words, for he yelled out, "Whitebeard is the one who ruled over this era." And his entire body burst into flames as he charged forward, ready to shut him up permanently. "Don't you insult the man who saved my life." The Straw Hats watched in terror as the Whitebeard pirates screamed out at him, pleading him to stop. "The name of this era is Whitebeard," Ace screamed out at the top of his lungs. "Ace, don't do it." Both the Whitebeard pirates and the Straw Hats all screamed, but it was too late. Akainu raised his own fist and charged at Ace at the exact same time until both of them clashed together. What happened next, no one was sure, for there was a mighty explosion from the moment that their fists clashed together. They could feel the heat generated against the fire and magma as the fire blinded them all for a moment. Some of them, such as Zoro and Sanji, had to try to strain their eyes to make out what was happening, but it was Brook, who had no eyes, who was able to get a look what was going on. He could see both of the different forms of fire clash, striking and both attempting to beat the other. Yet, in the end, it was Ace's flames that gave out. And Akainu knew this, for he shouted out over the roaring flames, "Whitebeard, and all you fools who call him your father, will all share the same miserable end." There was another explosion, and then a scream, and the next thing that any of them knew was Ace was sent flying backwards and landed with a crash on the ground. But what got them was that he had screamed in pain from his arm, where they could now see that there was a severe burn. Ace, one of the commanders, screamed in shock. He got burned. But that's impossible. Brook cried out in horror as everyone was shocked to the core by what just happened. He's fire, isn't he? How can he get burned? I was afraid of this. Robin said, sweat falling from her face. Ace laid there face down on the ground, his body shaking from pain, and maybe even the urge to scream again. He slowly moved his arms forward so that he could grip his burned arm, and Chopper let out a cry of fear as he went running forward to try and see how bad it was. You were overconfident because we are both Logias, right? Akainu asked him, in a tone that clearly said that even just talking to Ace was a waste of his time. Fool, you are merely fire. I am magma, a power that can burn even flames. My powers are far more superior to yours, boy. That is the difference in our strengths. But magma is the same thing as fire, isn't it? Nami cried out, going ghostly white as Chopper valiantly tried to get a good look at the burn. Disclaimer: this story do not belong to me. The author is Warm Memories and Brotherly Bonds by RoseDragonWitch. Magma can burn hotter than fire because it holds in heat, Robin said, yet despite all the fire going on around them she felt cold inside. Heat can't escape, so it becomes like melted metal. Truthfully, magma is much more destructive than fire as well as a physical substance, a very thick and heavy substance. Especially when compared to fire, which is just a gas. Not only that, but Akainu must have also used Haki in that attack as well, and would naturally be stronger than Ace's, so he could end up burning right through the fire and touch his real body as well. I cannot say for sure, but I assume that their natural defenses cancel out when their abilities are similar. But that's... Usopp gasped, unable to think of the right words to describe what he was feeling. It's impossible to guess how it will go when you pit a devil fruit user against another, Robin informed them, shaking her head as she was actually starting to shake. It's foolish to think that you can win based on your powers alone. And not only that, but Ace was already injured and weak from before. And now I doubt that he can use that arm. She couldn't help but think those words over in her mind. Logia devil fruit users who think they're invincible often die young. Chopper, how bad is it? Brook cried out as Chopper knelt down at Ace's side and stared at the arm. It's bad, he called back, gulping down and staring up in terror at Akainu. He knew that he could treat and save Ace's arm if he was here. He could have done something to help, but seeing the Admiral standing over him like this frightened him more than anything ever did. More than any warlord, zombie, or dangerous assassin he had ever met. Just looking up at him and seeing that face full of hatred was enough to freeze his entire body in alarm as he felt Ace shake next to him as he tried to bite back the whimper of pain. He slowly raised up his head, grinding his teeth hard as he stared at his injury. Ace, Luffy's voice cried out, getting their attention at once, and they looked back as he tried to rush in to help him. Luffy, don't, Nami tried to warn, but Luffy had hardly taken more than a few steps when he suddenly stumbled and fell to his knees. He coughed, his whole body shook as he tried to catch his breath. No, Chopper shouted out in panic, about to run over and try to help when he spotted the scrap of paper, fully reformed into a full sheet, falling through the air and landing on the ground a few feet in front of Luffy. Luffy, Jinbei called anxiously from behind him, you've reached your limit. There's nothing more you can do, Luffy. Usopp shouted, turning back to look at where Ace was now lying on the ground, and he couldn't believe that they had both been brought down like this. What happened now? Nami cried out, biting her nails, and turning to Chopper for an answer. He can't feel anything, but that doesn't mean that his body isn't exhausted. He shouted back, already having a good idea what was wrong as he jumped to his feet. His strength gave out just now. He probably can't move either. They'll have to carry him back to the ship. And there's no way that I'm ever going to allow Luffy to take another shot of adrenaline. If he even asks for another shot from Eva, then I will kill him. Ace's Vivre card, Luffy muttered to himself when he spotted the piece of paper slowly moving across the ground and just out of his reach. As he tried to get it, Akainu started to speak once again. The son of the Pirate King, Roger, and the son of the Revolutionary Dragon, he said, and when they looked back at him, they saw his eyes shadow over for a moment as he glared down at Ace with a merciless look in his eyes. This was it, they knew it had to be, that expression said it all. He was going to kill Ace right then and there as he dripped with magma. He already proved that he could do it in that last attack, and Nami cried out in fear, covering her mouth with her hands as her eyes watched in terror. To imagine that their sons have met and have become brothers is a frightening thought, Akainu went on, but know that your very bloodlines are a sin of the highest order. Your fates have long since been decided. I don't care if every other pirate escapes here, but I will not allow you two to leave here alive. Those words, they were filled with such a conviction, a belief, that Luffy and Ace shouldn't exist. As far as he was concerned, these two brothers were born as nothing but evil beings who needed to be stamped out before their evil spreads, as if they were carrying some deadly plague. And he was going to be the one to kill them. And that desire to kill was more powerful than any earthquake or bolt of lightning. They all felt and shook at such a cruelty. At the merciless gaze that pierced right through Ace, who still laid at his feet, like the blade of a knife. But no one was shaking as badly as Robin. Her entire body was trembling so much that she couldn't stand up any longer. She collapsed and fell to her knees and hugged her body as her eyes widened in fear. Those words, she had heard those very words all her life, and hearing those words brought back 20 years worth of suffering, of running for her life, of sadness, loneliness, of fear, of once believing that she didn't deserve to live. To hear them directed at Luffy and Ace, however, brought it all home, for her those memories that have haunted her every step for years. Akainu looked down at Ace with disgust once more before he leered, "Now take a good look." This was the moment. They were going to see the one thing that they had feared seeing more than anything else since these memories had started. Nami closed her eyes along with Chopper and Usopp. The others were unable to tear their eyes away from the scene, though they desperately wanted to. But what happened next was a sight that was 100 times worse than anything else that they could imagine. Akainu's beady eyes turned, not to Ace, but to something behind him, or rather, someone else. Ace suddenly gasped as his head jerked up, realizing before any of the Straw Hats what he was going to do. "Wait!" he screamed as Akainu jumped clean over him and flew through the air to where his true target was the whole time. The Straw Hats realized too late what was going on. "Hey, wait!" Zoro shouted out, his eye wide in a fright that they had never seen before. "No, you stay away from him. Luffy!" Nami screamed out at the top of her lungs. Akainu was bolting straight for Luffy, his fist, still billowing out clouds of smoke and lava, held high as Luffy didn't even realize that he was in danger yet. "Luffy!" Ace screamed out, and like that, the pain he was in seemed to have vanished as he got to his feet and ran, faster than anyone could see. The Straw Hats were all running forward as well, all of them desperate to stop the attack before it was too late, and so they didn't see the look in Ace's face. There was panic and fear there, all right, but nothing like anyone had ever seen there before. The closest that it had ever come to was that moment when they were both still young children and Luffy had been attacked by that bear after Ace refused to help. Here, he ran, faster than lightning as he turned to fire and flew forward just as Luffy heard Ace's cry. He had been about to pick up the Vivre card before he felt the heat on his face and looked up to see Akainu lunging straight at him. But he couldn't move, he froze there. Whether it was from fear or exhaustion, it was anyone's guess. All that anyone knew was that he was trapped and there was no way he could escape. "Luffy!" Usopp and Brook both screamed in terror as, without thinking about it, both of them stood in front of him, trying to block the attack coming, with Usopp even shooting out a few random pop greens to buy them some time. Brook didn't have time to even draw his blade as he stood there, trying to block the attack like how he had tried to protect his crew from Kuma back at Sabayati, though Akainu simply went through him, still heading straight for Luffy. Chopper shifted to his horn point and tried to bowl right into Luffy to knock him at all, but instead went right through him, shocking them all. Robin and Nami could only continue to scream out Luffy's name, unable to do anything but watch as panic took over them and tears were falling from their eyes, their cries deaf to their ears. "Move, bro. He's gonna kill you," Frankie shouted, holding up his arm, preparing to fire as both Zoro and Sanji had already struck, their attacks going straight through Akainu like dust. There wasn't anything that could be done as they could only watch, their hearts stopping in that brief moment as they screamed at him to move. This was just a memory, yet no one was thinking about that, nor did they care. All they knew was that their friend was in danger, and if something wasn't done, they were going to lose him. Even if this was all just some kind of illusion, it wasn't going to stop them from trying. No one could even dare to turn away as they saw the fire reflected in Luffy's terrified eyes. "Damn it all, Luffy. Move!" Zoro shouted, furious that he couldn't do anything to protect him this time, but as he watched, a ball of fire came flying by him so quickly that he could swear that he felt the wind touch him. All he could truly make out though, was the symbol of the Whitebeard pirates flying past him. He looked up and watched in time as Akainu's fist fell at Luffy, with time slowing down in an agonizing way. That was when he saw the whole tragic tale of what happened. The ball of fire that had raced by him was Ace. He ran forward and stepped directly between Luffy and Akainu, pausing only to push Luffy back just enough for him to stand there and spread his arms wide so that he acted as a shield for his little brother just as Akainu landed the blow, his fist colliding with Ace's back and burst right through his chest. No one dared to say a word as they watched, horror-struck by what just happened. The red beaded necklace that Ace always wore had burst when the attack hit and the beads had gone flying off in all directions, though the damage had been done before they had hit the ground. It didn't look real, like some kind of nightmare as time seemed to stop, but there was no doubt what happened. Ace protected Luffy from Akainu, and he continued to stand there with a fist of lava right through him. Clang! Zoro's sword fell from his hand and hit the ground with a loud clatter as he stared, his one good eye wide with shock, unable to believe what he was seeing. Nami collapsed, falling straight to her knees with her hands covering her mouth and was shaking so violently that she was trembling, unable to move. Usopp had fallen backwards onto his butt as he covered his own mouth as waves of nausea were erupting from his stomach. The blood, the fire, he couldn't take it, he wanted to just rip his eyes out and erase this image from his mind. He wanted to forget it all happened, to go back to the sunny and pretend that this was all a nightmare. Chopper was standing still, his mouth open in a silent scream, like he had forgotten how to even squeak. He had seen some terrible injuries in his life, but nothing he could think of could ever match the horror show that he was seeing now. Ace, he was melted from the inside out. He stepped backwards, away from the scene, and for the first time in his life he couldn't stand the thought of treating someone. The fear he felt as he stared frightened him, the thought of being the one to try and treat such a devastating wound, it was too much for him. The cigarette that Sanji had in his mouth was laying forgotten on the ground as Sanji just stood there with his mouth wide open. He had thought of how Ace had died, not that he wanted to ever imagine it, but this was worse than any of the theories that he could have come up with. To imagine that he was burned right through his body like this was too terrible for any amount of words to come up with. Brook was shaking so much that his entire body was clacking together, but he just couldn't help it. He had experienced death before, the slow agonizing way that the poison took his life. But this was a fate that he would not wish upon anyone, much less someone like Ace. He reached forward, a trembling hand stretched out to Luffy and Ace, yet powerless to do anything to help. "Luffy-san," he croaked, feeling numb inside. "Ace-san. Why?" Frankie gasped out almost silently. He couldn't even finish the question as he continued to just stand there like some stupid statue. What the hell was wrong with him? What kind of friend was he? Why wasn't he there to do something, anything, to stop this? Where was he when this was happening? Running around a snowy island drinking tea like a pansy dumbass. He just wanted so badly to beat his head in here. Robin remained standing, and though her expression was calm, her eyes were wide with shock. There were no way for her to describe what she felt but overwhelming sorrow. Her hand reached up to cover her mouth as she felt hot tears leaking down from her eyes and dripping down her cheeks. Luffy, she thought, I'm so sorry. They didn't know how much time had passed in that moment, only that after what seemed like a lifetime, Ace opened his mouth and coughed up blood and Luffy's jerked a little as if he just realized what happened. But that was when something else slowly drew their gaze from the pain written all over his face. On the ground the Vivre card, 1 minute ago had been completely whole, was now quickly burning away as if someone had sent it aflame. Though they didn't know it, they were all thinking back to that moment at Thriller Bark when they were saying goodbye to Lola and the others as she explained what that piece of paper was. This certainly is a Vivre card, but I haven't told you yet that this paper represents the life force of its owner. This belongs to somebody important to you, doesn't it? Yeah, it's my big brother's. Luffy's voice echoed proudly. Hang on to that, always. Ace's voice spoke up as well from another distant memory. That scrap of paper will reunite us someday. But Luffy wasn't looking anywhere but at Ace, who still stood there, gritting his teeth hard as if accepting what he had just done. Luffy just looked up with his eyes wide and full of disbelief as if he still couldn't believe what he was seeing. Yet when he saw Ace cough up blood he couldn't help but mutter his brother's name. Akainu just stood there with his arms still continuing to burn, with Ace still refusing to let out even a cry of pain. But at last, Akainu heaved his fist out with a terrible squishing noise that caused all the Straw Hats to let out cries of dismay. But still, Ace just continued to stand there even as there was a giant hole right through him, the fire continuing to burn so that they couldn't see anything else around that was happening inside. His eyes were completely blank as they shadowed over, but he didn't seem to be able to hold it back any longer and a massive amount of blood burst from his mouth. That was finally enough for Luffy to push himself up, any injuries he had completely forgotten as he screamed out, Ace. At his name, it was as if someone turned the sound back on. There were screams of confusion and panic coming from all around them as the Whitebeard pirates screamed out Ace's name, some running in to help, others stationary where they stood. But the only one who had Luffy's full attention was Ace, who was struggling to breath and Akainu towering over them both. Luffy, run! Nami screamed out, almost unable to see through her tears. That monster, Brook croaked out, finally lowering his hand, but still unable to even bring himself to get back up. The Whitebeard pirates were all soon firing at Akainu, determined to stop him and make him pay for what he had done to Ace. But their attacks were about as effective as water balloons and his body was simply reforming even after being blasted apart, merely stepping out of the thick cloud of smoke from the onslaught. Why won't he stop? Hasn't he done enough? Usopp screamed in panic, feeling as if he had been turned into an ice statue by Aokiji. He couldn't budge as he trembled and twitched. It's no good. There's no stopping this guy. One of the pirates cried out in horror as Akainu rose up as if he were rising from the pits of hell. It frightened them all, but more than fear fueled them when they realized what he was going to do next. He looked down at the barely breathing form of Ace as Luffy seemed at a complete loss as to what to do, looking desperately for someone to help them. Seems that you still have some life left in you, Fire Fist, Akainu said before he raised up his fist once more and magma started to billow out. No, stop, Chopper screamed out, his eyes wide. Leave him alone, haven't you done enough damage already? Brook hollered, forcing himself up and pulling out his own blade, stopping only to be held back by Frankie, though he looked ready to start firing as well. Luffy saw the fire and seemed to numb from shock to do anything as he whispered in hardly more than a whisper, stop it, but then his anger seemed to return as his eyes narrowed and he screamed out, stop it. But still, Akainu moved in for the kill, most of the Straw Hats covering their eyes as to not have to see something so horrendous again. Yet Ace was spared this much when another jumped right in front of him, this time to take the hit. "Jinbei!" Zoro shouted, getting the others' attention as their heads snapped up to see Jinbei standing protectively in front of the two brothers, and actually catching Akainu's punch with his bare hands as lava burst around in a miniature explosion. "Jinbei, not you too!" Nami shrieked out in terror. "Jinbei!" Luffy screamed almost at the exact same time as Nami. But still, Jinbei held his own, refusing to move back as his hands were being burned. "No!" he hollered, grinding his teeth in the effort to hold back the pain and stand his ground. "I will not let you hurt him again. Quit this pointless stalling, Jinbei!" Akainu yelled, sounding seriously pissed off that Jinbei had stopped him and was now attempting to force his way through him. "You used to be a warlord. I am sure you recall how strong I am. If by tearing this body apart, I can delay you in the slightest, then I am content," Jinbei declared, struggling with the effort of holding on but refusing to let Akainu have his way. "I have already accepted my death." The flash from Akainu's anger was enough to create another blast of heat, burning everything it touched, but it never got close to Luffy and Ace as Jinbei shielded them from the full blunt of it. Jinbei-san, Brook croaked as he tried to fight the waves of emotions that were threatening to spill out, yet he knew that he wouldn't be able to hold back for much longer. Not that it stopped people like Usopp, Nami, and Chopper to continue to cry as Nami sobbed out, "You fool, you big-hearted fool." He really did care about them both, Sanji said sadly, his own eyes stony, but he felt as if he were breaking apart on the inside. Zoro just looked on without saying a word, as if he didn't trust himself to speak. He merely picked up his fallen sword in an almost sluggish way as his own eyes turned black from the shadows. In the end, Jinbei's defense was strong enough to hold out against Akainu's offense and the blast forced the admiral back several yards. But it definitely did its damage, for when they looked back at him, he was breathing hard and seemed to be wincing in pain. They got a good look at the severe burns on his webbed hands. "So, I need to punish you too, traitor," Akainu hissed, his melting arm bubbling over as he held up his fist, looking ready to start punching once again. "Don't touch him," Brook shouted out desperately as Jinbei only glared back in response, looking like he was readying himself to die fighting him, which could very well happen since they didn't think that he could take another hit as lucky as last time. "Jinbei," someone ordered from behind him, "get down." Surprise went across Jinbei's face at the sound of the voice, but he did duck his head down as two figures flew over him and straight at Akainu. It turned out to be Marco and Vista, both of them looking pretty beat up but alive as they charge at him, with Vista slashing furiously and Marco, who had finally managed to get the cuffs off him, had his arms transformed into wings and his feet in the shape of bird claws. It was clear that they both used haki, having drew blood from the slashes that they succeeded in giving him before they landed lightly behind him, yet it did little good for their faces were contorted with rage and grief. "How irritating," Akainu grunted as reformed himself and turned to look at the pair of them calmly. "You haki users are always annoying. If he doesn't like that, then he's really going to hate it when I kill him," Zoro snarled. He was going to get him back for this no matter what happened, and for once, Sanji didn't seem to want to try and pick a fight with him. "Good," he hissed back, "I'll be more than happy to help you do that. I'm gonna make him wish he was never born by the time I'm through with him." "For a moment of neglect, I feel boundless regret," Vista stated, holding his sword steady, yet there was a shake to his voice as he steadied his blades against Akainu. "How could we let this happen?" Marco demanded, sounded repulsed with himself. Frankie gulped down hard, suddenly remembering that they had known and sailed with Ace for a few years as well. They were his crewmates and he suddenly realized what might be going through their heads at letting something happen to their friend. He couldn't begin to guess it, and to be honest, he didn't ever want to know what that experience was like. There was no hell that he was ever going to let this happen so long as he was here. So long as he was the shipwright for this crew, he would rather melt away than see that happen on his watch. "Pointless," Akainu informed them. "Can you not see it is too late for Fire Fist?" None of them could stand to hear those words coming from his rotten mouth, and some of them even had a few comebacks of their own to speak up. But that was when they heard the sound of something falling over just as Akainu turned his head back to look at what he had done. Everyone looked to see that Ace had fallen to his knees and was now being held up by Luffy, who had wrapped his arms around him, one hand holding onto Ace's unburnt arm, and the other right over the hole that was spilling out blood. Ace didn't say a word as he laid slumped over Luffy's trembling form, struggling for the slightest breath. But the worst part was seeing Luffy's eyes, wide and staring forward. They had never seen him look as lost and as scared as he did in that moment. "Luffy," Robin whispered, remembering back to when that look had been on her face as well as the bombardment went on at Ohara. The shock of what was happening to her home and everyone she cared about so suddenly and quickly was just too much for her mind to handle at once. She wanted to cry, to have Saul or her mother come and wake her up. She wanted it all to be nothing but a bad dream and she would wake up to just another day. It wasn't until she was in that little boat and rowing from the island and getting a good view of the entire place up in flames did it all hit her at once. She could never remember crying as hard as she did at that moment, never did she feel more alone and frightened than when she lost everything. To see that same look on her captain's face was like a knife in the heart. There was smoke wafting from Ace's back as his blood rained onto the ground, with Luffy being the only thing that was keeping him held up. They could hear the sounds of the swords and explosions as the war continued to fight around them, but they could care less about what was happening there. Already it felt like they were already an entire world away. Luffy's heartbroken face was all that they could see as he held tightly onto Ace, barely clinging to life. "Ace," he whispered hoarsely, as if hoping that Ace would tell that the wound wasn't that bad, or that he would be alright and he was worrying for nothing. But Ace didn't say anything like that as more blood dripped out of his mouth and ran onto Luffy's shoulder. How is he still?" Nami whispered, having found Robin in her state of incredulity and hung on as Robin hugged her tightly. I don't see how he." She looked away, burying her face into Robin's front. "This is beyond cruelty," Brook said, sounding as hoarse as Luffy, but he was shaking more from anger than anything else. He turned to glare back at Akainu, who held no remorse or shame in his face, and he felt his anger only rise higher. Those damn world government people have done some rotten stuff, but this was just sick. How could anyone do something like this to another person? "Hey," Luffy said a little louder, and it was a wonder that he was taking this as calmly as he was. But the Straw Hats knew him well enough to know that he still hadn't let sink in what just happened completely. It wasn't going to be much longer before he would snap out of this state. But for the moment he kept talking to Ace. "Can you hear me?" But when he pulled his hand away from Ace's back to look at it, they could see that it was drenched in blood. There was so much dripping off it, so much coated that all they could see was red. Seeing it there was causing Luffy's eyes and face to twitch wildly before he said, "Ace, we have to hurry and treat your wounds." Usopp couldn't take it as he stuffed his whole fist into his mouth to try and stop his sobs of misery, so numb he was as good as paralyzed. He was no doctor and didn't know the first thing about medicine, but even he knew that you couldn't bounce back from something like this. It was a miracle that Ace was still breathing now, but it was too much for Luffy to process all at once. He didn't want to admit that there was nothing that anyone can do for Ace now. "Chopper," Brook croaked out. Is it possible that he can still be saved?" Chopper just gulped down, unable to bring himself to answer. "I'm sorry, Luffy," Ace finally croaked out, which caused Luffy to stiffen at the words, gradually hugging Ace closer. "Just for me, you did all that crazy stuff, but I couldn't let you save me properly. I'm so sorry." It looked as if something inside Luffy just broke at those last 3 words. As if they could hear the sound of a funeral bell going off, and it just confirmed what they all knew was coming. But Luffy didn't seem willing to accept that. What are you saying?" he squeaked out before anger flashed in his eyes. "Don't be ridiculous. Don't say stupid things like that," he screamed before he turned his head back and he shouted at anyone who would listen, "Someone, help him. Ace, please save Ace. Hey, isn't there anyone who can save him? Come on." Ivankov was standing directly behind him, but he seemed to be just as stunned as anyone else. The other pirates just stared. But eventually, someone shouted for a doctor to run over and check on him. But it was Ivankov's expression that they stared at the longest. There were unshed tears in his eyes as fear seemed to be written all over and mixed in with all the unspoken emotions there. And they actually saw him mouth out Luffy's name as the doctor ran over, carrying his medical bag with him. Chopper slowly walked forward, as if in a trance, to see for himself. He didn't want to look, but he had to know if there was any chance at all. But he already understood what the diagnosis would be, perhaps more from his mind than looking at the actual injury. "Ace, are you alright?" the doctor yelled as he ran over, ducking behind Ace so that he could see the wound himself. "Hurry, help Ace," Luffy yelled desperately at him. "Sure," the doctor said, "let me see his wound. I'm begging you," Luffy pleaded as the doctor knelt down and looked. Chopper stood by his side and also stared at it, though he wished that he wasn't. He could see the full extent of the injuries. Ace had just had a hole burned right through him. He could see inside and even right through, the muscles, the bones, even the internal organs, all covered with blood and burnt black. Chopper's lip trembled as tears spilled over. None of the Straw Hats dared to say anything to him, for they could tell from just one glance at him that Chopper knew the answer. The damage was too serious even for him to do something. There was nothing that he could do to help even if he wasn't trapped on an island miles away. The doctor, who was there, looking ready to start treating him, stared at the wound for a moment before he started to shake and lowered his eyes so that they were hidden by the brim of his hat. He had just come to the same conclusion as Chopper and realized that it was far too late for anything that could be done. Fire Fist Ace had no hope of being saved from this. Luffy blinked, not understanding why he was just standing there. "Hey, what's wrong?" he demanded. "Hurry up and save him." But the doctor was shaking so badly it was as if he had a chill. He seemed too choked up for words as he just croaked out 2 things, "Forgive me." "What do you mean?" Luffy asked, still not understanding why he wasn't doing anything. "What are you saying? Do something. Hey, you're a doctor, aren't you? Aren't you?" Be that as it may, even a doctor has things that they can and can't do. Chopper gasped out, and for the first time, he was glad that he wasn't there to help. For he didn't think that he could ever have been able to be the one to tell Luffy that he couldn't save his big brother. But still, if they had been there, was there a chance that they could have stopped this from happening from the start? Couldn't they have stopped Akainu? But when he looked back at the others, he knew that there was no chance that they could have stopped him. If someone like Ace wasn't strong enough to fight him, what chance did they stand? Yet, he just couldn't stand by and watch. He couldn't even comfort Luffy. He could have given Ace something to stop the pain if nothing else. He was worthless. What kind of doctor was he? He let out a loud howl and wept as he curled up into a ball on the ground. It startled some of the others, but they knew him well enough by now to know that out of all of them, he would be feeling the most helpless here. Nami, who couldn't bring herself to let go of Robin, glared at one of the other boys to go comfort him, and it was Brook who did so. He stumbled shakily to his feet before he was able to collapse right behind him. As soon as he felt his presence there, Chopper let out a scream and spun around to bury his face against Brook, his nose running hard as he felt the feathered boa against his cheek. Brook didn't complain at all as he held him tightly and looked up to where Luffy was still looking desperately at the doctor to say or do something to help. But the doctor couldn't say anything, couldn't even bring himself to look at him, looking close to crying himself. "It's no use," Ace spoke up, his voice sounding strained, and it was clear it was a terrible effort just to speak. "He fried my insides." Chills went up everyone's spines as they could only imagine just how painful it would be to have your insides burnt to a crisp. "I won't be coming back from this," Ace struggled to say, trying to get Luffy to understand that there was nothing that he or anyone could do for him this time. "I can tell, my life is at its end." Luffy's eyes had regained that wild, mad look in them from before. "Don't say that," he said before an idea came to him and the tiniest flicker of hope reappeared on his face. "Oh, I know, Eva." But it was Sanji who shook his head this time. Ivankov may be known as a miracle worker, but he doubted that even he could pull off a miracle like this. But still, Luffy turned his head back to see Ivankov there, who hadn't budged an inch from where he stood as he cried out, "Hey, please, use that. Inject Ace with it, okay." Zoro glanced at Ivankov, but the look on his face answered everything for him. He looked like he was feeling nothing but regret for not being able to help Luffy after coming this far, and he tried to look away from him as Luffy continued to beg. "Inject Ace with that stuff you saved me with." Luffy pleaded frantically, his words almost sounding like they were speaking from a madman at this point in time. "Save Ace. Okay. Please. I'm begging you. Ace, give Ace some of it too. Give him a shot of it." At last, Ivankov didn't seem to be able to take it anymore as he shouted out, "Straw Hat Boy." Luffy fell silent as Eva took a deep breath and told him, honestly and bluntly, "Ace Boy is beyond saving." And just like that, the flicker of hope that had shone there for only a moment died. Luffy's eyes were filled with terror as he stared at him, whispering more to himself than to them, "That can't be." He then looked back at Ace and asked, "Ace, are you going to die?" And when Ace didn't answer him, that seemed to have been too much for Luffy to bear. His eyes shone with anger now as the hand that was still covering the wound tightened slightly as he demanded, "Didn't you promise me? You promised. You said you will never die, didn't you?" "Ace, we all must go eventually," Brook whispered sadly, finally turning his head away as Chopper cried even louder, saying that he was sorry to Ace over and over for not being able to save him. But Luffy didn't ever want to go through losing Ace and being left alone. Robin answered as Frankie shoved his head to the ground and she felt his tears splashing over the ground and at her feet. "Like I said, people do the craziest things, oftentimes dangerous ones, when someone we love is in danger. Ace must have known what it would mean when he jumped in front of that attack, but he did it anyway. If it were the other way around, I know that Luffy would have done the same thing." The anger that Luffy had looked like it had gone by that short rant. Instead, now he was taking a few deep breaths and hugged Ace tighter to him. It was as if he thought that it could somehow stop him from dying if he just held on tight enough. "Ace, what are you saying?" he demanded tearfully. "You promised me. You said you would never die. You told me that, didn't you, Ace?" Ace didn't seem to answer him at first as he raised his head just a fraction and looked behind him with a blank look in his eyes. But Sanji was the first to see how he was clinging on as tightly as he could with his good arm. The other, that Akainu had burnt, laid limply at his side as it dripped blood into a pool on the ground. His one good arm was wrapped tightly around Luffy's neck, however, as if he was hoping that he could stay around as well. But it was obvious that he knew that there was nothing that could be done. So instead, he wanted to just hold on for what little time he still had. "Was it?" Ace began, not answering Luffy's questions. "Good that I was born." At that question, the Straw Hat stared at him and Luffy had stopped crying for a moment as he looked at him, not able to see Ace's face from where he held him. But Luffy looked as if he couldn't believe that Ace could think to ask him something like that. Yet Ace was far from done. "Nobody wanted me to be born," he said grimly. "I probably wouldn't even have wanted to live if it weren't for that whole deal with Sabo, and having a wild little brother like you to look out for." "Ace, what are you talking about?" Usopp whimpered out, his face stained with tears. Robin shushed him gently, knowing that answer all too well. To grow up thinking that you never should have existed was something that she had been forced to live with all her life. She could understand Ace's desperate desire to know the truth, to be given a reason to keep living and be satisfied with that. Ace's voice was fading with every second, yet he stopped speaking for a moment as he looked like he was trying to find the right words. No one else wanted me, after all. So, it was only natural. That's not true, bro. Frankie declared loudly, looking up from the ground, still crying out a river. Come on, look around you. You got your bro and your crew here. They didn't take on the world here on a whim, you know. I think that this should give you your answer. Frankie, Zoro scolded as Luffy fought against the wave of tears himself. Not now. Oh, right, Ace went on, just remembering something. If you ever see Dayton, then give her my regards. For some reason, now that I know that I'm going to die, even her name sounds touching to me. You never do realize how important someone is to you until you, Nami stated, sounding as if she had a terrible cold. Oh, poor Dayton, she could only imagine just how she must have felt when she read the paper and found out that someone she raised like a son was dead. Luffy's eyes were screwed up tightly as he kept yelling out, I keep telling you, don't die. Can someone turn this off? Usopp shouted, unable to take it anymore. Turn off the memory. I don't think I can take it anymore. Just, turn it off. Black out. Do something. But Ace went on speaking and it silenced them all as they listened. I only have one regret, he confessed to Luffy softly. That I couldn't see you, fulfill your dream. His eyes turned a little glassier as the sounds of the battle faded around them. But, I'm sure, you can make it. You're my little brother. Ace panted for air for a moment, his breathing becoming more laborious as he forced himself to just keep talking. If this was going to be his last few minutes of life, then he was determined to make them count by telling Luffy everything that he needed to say. On that day, just like we promised on that day, the way I had lived my life, and Ace finally smiled again. A sad, but true smile as he admitted, I have no regrets about it. They all knew at once what day he was talking about. It was the morning after they heard about what happened to Sabo and they were sitting up on that cliffside together, both of them making promises, including Ace promising a crying Luffy that he would never die. Yet Ace threw that promise away in order to keep the one he made to Sabo, to take care of Luffy. That's not true. Luffy continued to shout out, refusing to give in to the fact that Ace was dying. When he lost one big brother, he tearfully stared out at the sea before declared that he would become stronger no matter what so that he would never have to go through that again. It was a lot of big talk coming from someone so young, and most never would have believed that it was possible. But Luffy meant every word, he never wanted anyone he cared about to go away ever again. And in his eyes, he had failed. Don't lie to me. I'm not lying, Ace informed him gently. What I truly wanted wasn't fame or to be renowned or anything like that, after all. Robin shut her eyes, having guessed this for a very long time now. Was it good that I was born? Ace asked him once again. All I truly wanted was just the answer to that question. How could he think something like that? Usopp asked, not believing that anyone could ever question if they wanted to live or not. This isn't something that just anyone can understand, Robin told him sadly. But when the whole world thinks that your existence is a crime, you can't help but wonder. She raised her head, trying to control the trembling of her mouth and the burning behind her eyes. Though I know that now, at one point I couldn't help but wonder that exact same thing for a long time. It's hard when it's just you against the world. Robin, Sanji said quietly, hatred going through him at the thought of anyone forced to make a lady suffer that kind of suffering on her own. I don't get it. Nami demanded furiously, shaking Robin a little. People think that you, Ace and Luffy aren't supposed to live, but monsters like the celestial dragons and Akainu are accepted. That doesn't make sense. That's just how the world works, Robin answered grimly. She could only guess what was going through Ace's head at that moment, but she could only pray that he at least found the answer that he was searching for. She found that same answer herself 2 years ago when she stood atop the Tower of Justice at Enies lobby and will never forget the jubilant moment when she was able to say that she wanted to live, that she was so happy to be alive. It's never fair, but that's how it goes. Only those who are truly determined to do something to change it does justice truly get served. Her eyes narrowed behind her sunglasses. But Akainu will pay for this. Zoro gripped his sword extra tight at those words. Count on it, he promised darkly. Nami sniffled, looking at Robin's face and wondered just what that would be like, to actually question if you have the right to life or not. She didn't believe that for a second. People like her and Ace and Luffy were good people. The world was a better place with them in it. It was because of stupid people like the government who thought that they didn't deserve the life that was the problem. They didn't deserve to suffer because of who their families are. They can't help who they were born as. Ace held a peaceful expression as he closed his eyes, as if thinking back on the most wonderful memories. He smiled a little wider at that before he opened them again. They were cloudy now, he wouldn't hang on much longer. Just then, everything went deaf around them. The whole time, the sounds of the battle had been ringing out as they continued to fight for their lives, but now it was completely mute. They had thought that their hearing had gone on them, but they could hear Ace's breathing. It was shuddering, rough pant, and he seemed to be struggling just to draw breath. He spoke in hardly more than a whisper, but still he was still smiling. I can't speak loud enough for the others to hear it. And Luffy's eyes widened at those words as more tears welled up. It was the exact look, the mixture of horrified realization and helpless agony, that had been on his face when he first found out about Sabo. But he finally understood what was about to happen. Despite all that he had done, everything he went through, this would be the very last moment he would spend with Ace in this world. Please, pass on what I'm about to say, Ace pleaded with him, sounding like the words were causing him pain in more ways than one. It seemed difficult, like he was trying to convey everything that he was feeling, everything that he wanted to say. In just one last sentence, old man, he began in a thick voice, everyone, and you, Luffy. His voice was breaking and becoming choked up with emotion, but still he went on. Even though, I've been good for nothing my whole life, even though I carry the blood of a demon within me. Ace pulled Luffy tighter against him for a moment, as if he was trying to make sure that he could feel his brother's heart still beating against his own dying one as they held one another for his last few seconds of life. Tears were forming up in his eyes as he found the words that he needed to say. Thank you, he said simply as the tears fell, mixing with his blood, before he declared, and sounding so happy despite everything, thank you for loving me. Never have any of them heard such a simple sentence in their lives, but one that was also filled with so much feeling and pain. Those words alone were finally too much for even people like Zoro and Sanji, forcing them to turn away, feeling like scum for seeing such a private and touching moment. Ace held onto Luffy firmly for that one last moment, took one last breath before his trembling mouth curled up into another smile. Peaceful, contented, and his tear-filled eyes slowly became empty, the fire in them fading as they began to shut for the final time. His good arm slackened, as if still wanting to hold onto Luffy for just a moment longer, but all that strength had left it and it slowly slipped. And he fell. Luffy's stunned state had caused his arms to fall and he blinked, looking down desperately as they all looked to see the fading light from Ace's eyes. It seemed to last forever as Ace fell, every single person on the battlefield turning to look with eyes wide. But the fraction of the moment before Ace hit the ground, they saw his eyes close as he smiled even wider, with no signs of pain or sadness or regret. If they had spotted it, they would have seen the vivre card laying forgotten a few feet away, the paper burning away to ash and then dust in the wind just before Ace hit the ground. And he hit the ground with a loud thud that was as good as a blast to the Straw Hat's ears, his blood splashing underneath and dripped around him. They stared, everything silent around them but for the sound of the wind blowing. They could see the full damage done to his back, seeing that it had all been destroyed, a gaping black hole that had destroyed his mark of the Whitebeard pirates. A mark that once showed his pride, but he cast it all aside, everything he became and worked for in one moment of pure love. His face still held no pain however, it was full of peace with that same satisfied, almost comfortable, smile. It was as if he had merely fallen asleep instead of having just died. There was no fear, just a serene look, showing that he didn't have any regret. He accepted his fate with open arms. Ace, Usopp whispered, his eyes wide as he could do nothing more than stare at Ace lying there. He couldn't believe what had just happened. Everything happened so suddenly, that he couldn't accept that it had really, that Ace was now. Ace-san, Brook whispered, still holding onto Chopper, who was now looking like a stuffed animal from his frozen astonishment. Thank you, you saved your brother's life. Luffy's alive thanks to you. I don't know what else to say, but, thank you. He silently cried once again, giving a prayer that Ace was finally at peace, that he was happy that Ace left this world with no other regrets and that he got to spend his last few moments as a free man. But there was also no doubt to him now, that Ace had to be one of the greatest men he had ever known, even if he never had the pleasure to meet him in person like this. Everyone around him knew the pain of loss, understood what it felt like to have someone you care die and there was nothing you could do to have changed it. Or to have someone sacrifice so much for your mistakes, to try and protect your life. Each one of them gave a silent prayer as well, that those that they have lost before would be there to meet up with Ace in the next life and watch out for him. And also, in that moment, they all made a solemn vow. Their promise to Ace. They won't let his sacrifice be in vain. They will always be grateful to him for saving Luffy since they weren't there to help. They failed to protect him before, but they weren't going to ever let that happen again if they could help it. This time, they were going to do what Ace wanted and take care of him from here on out. Luffy didn't say a word as he sat there, his front and hands covered with Ace's blood. He stared down with eyes in an emotion that they weren't completely sure what it was, yet it frightened them to see that look there. Ace, he whispered softly as he stared down at the broken form of his big brother, his best friend, and the person who knew him better than anyone else ever had. The way that he said Ace's name was as if he was just hoping that this was all some kind of joke and that he would open his eyes once more and laugh. But Ace just laid there on the ground, his blood painting the ground red, that same peaceful look still etched in his face. That happiness of finding his long sought after answer having not been in vain. There was no breath or heartbeat coming from him. Ace, Luffy said one last time, hoping against hope that he would open his eyes just one more time. But nothing, that was when it seemed to have hit Luffy that this wasn't some kind of nightmare. His hands began to tremble and shake as the blood that coated them dripped onto the ground and his entire body soon began to follow suit. His eyes filled with tears as he seemed to try to remember how to scream. Voices then began to echo around them, as if from a fading dream. They could hear Ace's voice speaking as if from far away. "Did you think I was dead?" Ace's cold voice demanded. They heard Luffy crying, but it sounded younger, more squeaker as he tried to say, "But what are you crying for?" Ace barked at him. "Don't just kill me off like that, you idiot." His memories. Usopp croaked, staring up in shock as he recognized the conversation as the one that they had after Ace had returned with Dayton after the fire. "I promise you," Ace's voice went on, "I will not die. Do you really think I could die and leave behind such a weakling little brother? Didn't ya know?" And this time, his voice was fading away quickly like he was going away. "When you exchange sake cups, you become brothers. From this day onwards, we are brothers." That was when that last word ended, like hearing a voice bounce off a deep chasm, and they listened to it echo until nothing but empty sound returned. The wind blew, the only thing they could hear as Luffy gazed up into the sky, his eyes rolling back as tears splashed down and he started to cry. He was covered in his brother's blood, staring up with his mouth wide open as he cried violently, each sob shook the memory. Luffy's spirit had been broken completely, he was trapped in this nightmare of seeing Ace die, and that was the end of it all. Nami broke free from Robin at last, trying to go out and comfort Luffy, but his cries shook more and more as his hands twitched violently, looking like they were trying to burst out of socket. That was when something else happened. The memories that they had seen had always darkened out, but here, it was as if someone had placed a green film over everything. That was when they saw the moment standing out, like some kind of shadow, the moment that Akainu has impaled Ace. His blood dripping down as Luffy held him, fire burning his body, Ace's words echoing in his ears. The Straw Hats were horrified at seeing that all over again, being played over and over in an endless circle. But it kept going, with Luffy continuing to scream wildly, blood dripping from his own mouth and splashed down his front to mix with Ace's blood. They could hear the cries and screams from the other pirates around them, but they were faint and the only thing that they could make out was Luffy, whose cries grew louder and louder, threatening to burst their eardrums. But when the last shriek came, the loudest one yet, sounding almost beast-like, and that was when everything stopped. Everything froze as if time had stopped around him. Luffy and Ace. Luffy looked up, having thought that he heard something, and was staring at the door. "Something wrong?" Ace asked him calmly as he sat next to him. The two of them had spent at least an hour, maybe longer, in Makino's bar. Luffy had been disappointed to see that she wasn't here to greet him, but there were plates of steaming hot food in his favorite old spot and he jumped there as Ace joined him right by his side. They had laughed and drank and ate the whole time as they would tell each other stories of the adventures that they had since they became pirates. By far, Luffy's favorite story was when Ace told him about how he had gotten his hands on the flame fruit. Ace would often scold Luffy when he told him about the dangerous stunts that he had pulled off. But Luffy was too excited to tell him all about his journeys to listen. Soon, Ace would laugh as well, smiling as he listened to his little brother talk. But oftentimes, his mind would also wander away for a brief moment. That day at Marineford, it had happened so fast, he had survived twice because of his little brother had simply wanted to save him. But that last blow had been too much for him. Not that he cared, he had protected Luffy from the mistake that he made when he stopped running, and that was all that he cared about. Just like he promised, he would live without any regrets for the rest of his life and he would always keep Luffy safe. He remembered that promise he made to Luffy about how he would never die, and it hurt him to think that he had gone back on his word. But he had another promise to keep, one to Sabo to take care of him, and one vow he made to himself. That day that Luffy had gotten hurt when fighting the Bear King, when Ace saw him ripped open like that and bleeding to death as he laid on the ground, it was something he hadn't felt since Sabo had been taken away from them. He was terrified that he was going to lose Luffy right then and there because he had been too stubborn to jump in and help. And when he found out that Luffy was going to be okay, he felt nothing but relief from the bottom of his heart. Was that the moment that he started to change for the better? He just knew that he never wanted to lose something as dear to him as his little brother. He remembered when he had been young, before he met Luffy, he would ask random strangers what would happen if Roger had a child. They had all said the same thing, and it was at that he had learned to hate his blood and despised his father. He just wanted to live and say just once that he was glad for it. For the longest time he couldn't understand why his mother would die the way that she did. He had found out about her from Gramps after much arguing and demanding. At last the stubborn old man told him how his mother, Portgas D. Rouge, had somehow managed to postpone his birth for months to protect him. The world government was terrified that a child of Roger might exist and gave a massive search on the island that he was last seen on to find that child. But she defied all nature to keep him hidden until she felt that it was safe. But that had come at the price of her life. By the time that she did have him, it had been too much for her, it had cost her strength and she only lived long enough to give him his name. Gal D. Ace. That name, his blood, that had been his death sentence before he was even born. It was like some kind of shackle to him, tying him to something that he couldn't ever hope to escape from. His life had been condemned before it even started, all because of his father. And so, he took his mother's name instead. He owed her his life and was proud to take up Portgas instead. But still he always felt as if there was some kind of dark cloud hanging over him wherever he went. He couldn't understand why his mother would ever want to give her life for him. He never found out until that moment that he saw that bastard go after Luffy. That same crybaby, weak, and thick-headed little brother was in danger and Ace just acted without thinking. He ran up and took the hit for him, protecting his life at the cost of his own. He gave everything up for that one moment. Everyone's sacrifices, including his mother's, was all gone because of what he chose to do. But he would have done it all over again if it meant that Luffy would survive. He was only sorry that he left him carrying the heaviest burden that anyone could ever carry. He was sorry that he let all that his brother went through for him go to waste and he couldn't let Luffy save him in the end, just forcing him to see all that. But, something wrong? He asked, staring at Luffy's confused face as he looked at the door. Luffy didn't say anything as he slowly spun off his seat and stood up to look at it as if transfixed. I don't know, Luffy confessed, frowning a little. But I just had this weird feeling that I need to go somewhere. I think my crew's looking for me. Ace smiled sadly. He knew that it was true, the sun was starting to rise and that meant that his time with Luffy was almost over. He had to send him back soon. But before he did go, there was one last thing that they had to do first. Sabo would be here in a moment and that was when they would put an end to something once and for all. Luffy took a few steps to the door before he stopped and looked back at him with a little fear in his eyes. Ace smiled back at him in a gentle way. He could never forgive himself for forcing Luffy to go through what he went through. To see and hold him before he died. If he hadn't been so damn selfish then who knows what would have happened. Yet despite his clueless nature, he knew that Luffy could see how the world worked better than most people, and saw it in such a childish way that Ace held dear and cherished about him. Especially when they were children and they would run wild in the hills. He never had a chance to tell him about those dark thoughts that had plagued his mind for as long as he could remember. That was why he told him everything that he needed to say as he died. He wanted to let him know that he was alright for leaving the world so soon, and that he found the answers that he was searching for. Well, there was one regret. He remembered when he first met his crew in Alabasta and though they argued and fought, he could tell just how much they cared and admired Luffy, not that they would ever admit it though. But they were loyal to him and he knew that they would travel anywhere that he went, knowing that they would take care of him set his mind at ease. Luffy still had the rest of his life to live, and Ace didn't want him to give up everything he worked for because he was too stubborn to ignore some bastard who made him angry. He was only sorry that he wouldn't be there to see him fulfill his dream. Sure, he teased Luffy all the time about that. And sure he wanted Pops to be made into the king, but he now understood that seat was meant only for Luffy. He had no doubts that Luffy would get there one day. Their fight had proved that for him and he knew that nothing would stop him now. Since that moment, that time stopped for him, everything seemed to have remained still. He dreamt of that vast blue sky, so long that Luffy was still alive and free, he didn't need anything else. As sappy as that sounded, it was a precious treasure to him. And after countless adventures throughout their lives, his little brother had grown stronger. Live on. You leaving? He asked as Luffy looked at him long and hard. Something's telling me to, he answered, and he could tell that Luffy didn't want to leave just yet. I know, Ace said, and he stood up from his seat as well. But there's one last thing that we need to do. Luffy's eyes brightened a little when he heard that they would have a little more time together. But before they went, Ace asked him something. Was it good that I was born? He asked him softly, though he already knew what Luffy was going to say. And he wasn't disappointed as Luffy stared at him, as if he couldn't believe that he would ever ask something like that. Of course, he shouted fiercely, and without a shred of doubt in his tone. Ace only smiled back at him. I know, was all he said. And that was enough of an answer for him.